After two police officers avoided indictment in the deaths of unarmed African Americans Michael Brown and Eric Garner, demonstrations broke out all across the United States. Now, months later, protesters are demanding a reform of the grand jury system. Our reporter Nick Harper has the story from New York.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now!
Across America, anger is growing.
Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up!
There's a rising feeling of injustice.
Shut it down! Shut it down!
In two separate cases, one in Ferguson, Missouri, the other in New York City, grand juries decided not to prosecute white police officers for the deaths of unarmed black civilians. 18-year-old Michael Brown was shot in Ferguson. His death and the subsequent grand jury decision sparked some of the worst race riots in the US for several decades. And now the Justice Department has said the officer who killed Brown, Darren Wilson, will not face civil rights charges either. Eric Garner was detained in New York by an officer using an illegal chokehold. For several weeks, thousands of people have spilled onto New York streets to campaign against what they see as police brutality and an ineffective legal system.
I think this is a fundamental breakdown of law and order if people don't know whether or not they're going to be randomly killed. And it's hard to know where any of this will go because you have militarized police, you have a president that's sort of like a lost soul, you have a grand jury system that's acting as though it's a trial system where no one ever goes to trial. So you have all these things going on that just can't be reversed overnight.
In the nation's capital, there have been similar scenes and a similar sense of anger.
We want to get 10,000, then 20,000, then 50,000, then 1 million people out.
He wasn't indicted, even though there were 7 witnesses to say he shot Mike Brown with his hands up. So we out here to demand, justice for not just Mike Brown, but all these African people that happen, to get killed by the police.
You reach for something, you're gonna be dead. I'm telling you, bro. I'm telling you.
And there have been protests in New Jersey following the killing of Jermaine Reed, an unarmed black man shot by police as he got out of his car, seemingly with his hands up. His shooting filmed by the police car dashboard camera. The US is one of the few countries in the world to still have grand juries. They're made up of a group of citizens who decide if there's enough evidence to justify a trial and whether criminal charges should be brought. But as the proceedings happen behind closed doors, some question the secrecy of the system. Criminal attorney Bob Bloom is calling for change. He feels the grand jury system is outdated and doesn't deliver justice.
One of the problems with the grand jury system that you saw in Ferguson and the one in New York City was that it wasn't transparent. The grand juries are secretive bodies, and citizens didn't get to see what happened.
Bloom feels the civilian witnesses in the Ferguson case were differently and unfairly treated compared to the police officers.
The cross-examination of the police officers was non-existent, whereas everybody who testified in the Ferguson grand jury that the person had his hands raised, they were heavily cross-examined, whereas the people who said his hands weren't raised, they were hardly cross-examined. So you can see how the system was distorted.
A team of FBI agents is now looking into the decision not to indict the officer responsible for Garner's death, while the accidental killing of another black civilian, Akai Gurley, in New York City, will be investigated by a grand jury in the coming months. Nick Harper for Telesaur, New York.